Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by Dr. Aaron Taber. He is the assistant professor at the University of New Brunswick, where he co directs the Human Computer Interaction Lab. His research work spans right from rehab games to breathing technologies. And I discovered Aaron's research paper while I was learning about heart rate variability and breathwork. His paper caught my attention because it answered a key question: what's happening inside our bodies when we follow breathwork protocols? And post that, we've been having great discussions around HRV and breathwork. Aaron, glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's start with the basics. Most of us have noticed that taking a few slow, deep breaths can calm us down. But what's actually happening in the body when we practice breath work?
Yeah, okay, cool. Um, a lot of these slow breathing activities really revolve around something we call autonomic balance, right? This balance between our uh, sympathetic nervous system, kind of the flight or flight response, we often hear it called in kind of popular media or whatever, and the parasympathetic system, the kind of rest and digest phase of our autonomic nervous system. Um, Doing slow breathing can really rapidly help us shift from, a little background first. Most of us spend a lot of our time in an imbalance towards the sympathetic system, right? We're in a chronic or continual state of this sort of flight or fight response, whether it's because we received a stressful email or our phone's ringing when we're busy or we're stuck in traffic or whatever, right? So we often in our daily life spend an imbalance towards that fight or flight response, which evolutionarily really evolved to be used kind of strategically in opportune moments, right? We need to get away from a predator, or we need to do this. So the slow breathing is sort of an easy to do physiological mechanism that will help us regain that balance that we often lack in daily life.
Okay, great. So now you have also studied something called as the heart rate variability, HRV.
Yeah,
For people hearing this term for the first time, can you briefly explain the science of heart rate variability and the breathwork connection? And how
yeah,
does
sure.
HRV help us measure stress?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so um, heart rate variability, or HRV, is the acronym we hear about in media or blogs online or in science or whatever, right? Is something that's talked about a lot in this area because we can really use it to characterize or quantify that balance, that autonomic balance that I was just talking about. So the balance between our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Um, the way I often describe heart rate variability is uh, most of the time when we think about our heart rate, right, we would say, oh, a healthy heart rate is something around 60 beats a minute or something like this, right? And that kind of gives the impression that our heart just beats rhythmically like a drum at a predetermined exact rate over and over and over again, extremely rhythmically, right? Um, for estimates like that, so for measuring heart rate over a minute or a 10-minute period, that's an okay assumption. But in reality, our heart rate really changes moment to moment, dynamically in kind of alignment with all of these other physiological processes in our body. So even if we were to capture a resting heart rate to measure your heart rate for 30 seconds and say, okay, that equates to 60 beats per minute. The timing, if you kind of zoomed in and looked at it on a millisecond level, would vary between each heartbeat and the next successive one. So it may be, I don't know, 700 and something milliseconds, and then 650, and then 780, and whatever. Right? So conceptually, that's the idea of heart rate variability. The interbeat interval is an outcome measure you'll sometimes hear, IBI,
Mhm.
is the measure of the duration of time between two successive heartbeats. And then the term variability means the same thing as we think about in statistics, right? If we were to take a large number of these things and calculate either the standard deviation or variance or some statistical measure like that, that's really what heart rate variability is capturing. How variable is our heart rate over time, or each of those interbeat to beat minutes? So an important thing conceptually to understand is that that is good. Having variability in the beat to beat timing of our heartbeats is a good and healthy and natural thing, right? It's our heart being an extremely efficient and optimized part of our body, responding to the current needs of our body at any time, right? So, one example of that, it responds to many, many of the organs that build up our autonomic nervous system. But one concrete example of that in this area that we work in is the connection just to our normal respiration and our heart rate. If we think about what really is breathing, one way to think about it is it's a gas exchange process, right? We breathe in and we breathe in fresh fuel that our body is ready to use. It comes into our lungs and to all the way into the kind of smallest regions of our lungs. And then at that point, when it's there, there's a oxygen carbon dioxide exchange that occurs in our blood to oxygenate our blood and to get rid of the spent carbon dioxide. When we breathe out, we expel that fuel, right? So if you look at heart rate variability, like if you hook someone up with a heart rate monitor and a respiration monitor and looked at those signals over time and compared them against the other temporally, you would see that every time we breathe in, the heart rate increases. So the timing between each successive heartbeat shrinks a little bit. And that's because there's this abundance of fresh fuel in the lungs. The body wants to get as much blood through those cavities of the lungs to do the gas exchange as much as we can to take most advantage of that fresh fuel in the lungs, right? To optimize gas exchange. Then when we exhale, the opposite happens. The duration of time between the heartbeats grows, in a sense, like reducing the heart rate to conserve energy. Because what's happening in that phase of respiration is we're expelling spent fuel. There's no, it's not most efficient to pump blood through the lungs at that point in time to do gas exchange because that fuel is already spent, right? All of the oxygen, it's carbon dioxide saturated. Um, so that's a really interesting example of how heart rate variability can be an outcome measure to show us about the other internal workings
Mhm.
our of our body, right? Yeah,
And how does breath work influence HRV?
yeah,
Because nowadays, people are trying to understand that, hey, how could we improve our HRV?
mm,
And what's the breathwork connection over here?
yeah. So I think an important thing to keep in front of mind when we talk about all of this is the HRV, so the improved HRV, normally what we mean by an improved HRV is an elevated variability score. So we can quantify that in a few ways. One common outcome measure is called SDNN, the successive or the standard deviation of normal to normal beats. So the way you would compute that is, again, it's a standard deviation measure, a measure of variability, but the normal to normal part just implies that we exclude some outlier conditions from that calculation, which could throw it way off, right? So it's a measure of how variable the heart rate is over time. And normally, what we mean when we want to improve our heart rate variability, either from an athletic perspective or from a breathwork perspective, is we want to increase that value. So we want to make our moment to moment heart rate more variable rather than less variable. The
Okay.
reason that's desirable is because really what that indicates, right? This elevated HRV indicates that our body is more efficiently adapting to all of these real-time ongoing processes and it's being more efficient in a sense. What I'm going to tell you about was really kind of pioneered on sort of the medical psychophysiology side of this by some academics known as Paul Lehrer, Richard Gervitz. And these are the people who really kind of first conceptualized an exercise called heart rate variability biofeedback. And the biofeedback part of it means that we'll do a breathwork exercise while we have a real time visualization of these underlying physiological signals so we can see what's happening in real time, right? Feedback of our biology or of our physiology. Um, so the connection really revolves around two mechanisms, or like why is breathing an appropriate way to exercise our HRV. One is that mechanism I was just talking to you about, right? The breathing in naturally increases our heart rate variability, breathing out naturally decreases our heart rate variability. But another one is called the baroreflex, and it's the process in our body that regulates our blood pressure. In engineering terms, you could kind of think of it as I think you would call it a negative feedback loop. And that's kind of like the way it works, right? It sort of works the same way like the thermostat on our wall in our room right now would work, right? Um, there's a system in place in our body that measures our current blood pressure. Um, and if it's too high, it tells the heartbeat to slow down a little bit to then reduce the pressure a little bit. If it's too low, it tells the heart rate to increase a little bit to then elevate that pressure to stabilize it around a healthy or our current blood pressure value, right?
Mhm.
And that mechanism is called the baroreflex. It operates at roughly around 6 cycles a minute, which is where we get in a lot of breathing exercise coaching towards this 6 breaths per minute idea. The idea is that this baroreflex is an ongoing process, whether we're thinking about it or not, right? It's just constantly happening in our body, regulating our blood pressure. However, we have easy control over the rate at which we breathe. If we bring our breathing into alignment with that existing process that's always going on. So right now, I'm probably breathing at, I don't know, 24 to 30 breaths a minute because I'm speaking a lot, right? So it's short, choppy breathing. And even though that adaptivity is happening, it's very quick and segmented and split up. If I consciously focus on my breathing and bring it down into alignment with the periodicity or the rate at which that other mechanism is happening, we get this amplification effect. They call it coherence in like signal analysis. And if you're familiar with either a famous example of an engineering failure is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, maybe. That one you've probably seen video clips of it where the wind came down through the river at just the right rate that it started to resonate with
Right.
the inner physical properties of the bridge, and then it caused this like amplification effect.
Yes.
If we bring our breathing down to the same uh, periodicity that baroreflex is happening at, we can get that same resonance effect, and we can get this high amplification in our HRV by bringing those two signals into alignment with each other. It amplifies them even more so than either one in isolation would. Another way to kind of think about that is if you're pushing a small child on a swing, right? If you time your pushes at just exactly the right moment, you can almost get like an amplification effect. If you push at not strategic moments, they really don't move anywhere, right? But if we bring those two things into alignment, the natural swing of that person and the push, we get a net larger effect. And in kind of signals in physics and also in the context of these breathing exercises, we call this resonance.
Mhm.
Why is that beneficial? It's a little more, it's not as straightforward as just to say in the moment. So it's certainly true. In the moment, that amplifies our HRV a lot, right? If we look at the real time signals of doing an exercise like that, the variability, our SDNN scores would be extremely high compared to sitting at rest. However, what's really going on is that is kind of a training or a strengthening exercise that over time will allow our body to be more responsive to, for example, the baroreflex. Over time, by putting yourself in that state, um, your body's natural or baseline HRV will elevate the same way. I don't know, if you go to the gym and lift weights over time, you get stronger, right? There's a bodily response. The same thing here. So it's not so much that in the moment doing the exercise has this physiological benefit. Sure, we do see this elevated HRV, but that's really a marker of I'm doing the exercise appropriately and I'm putting myself in a scenario where I will improve with continued practice. Not necessarily that I'm just magically all of a sudden healthier all at once kind of thing, right? Yeah. So really, the connection is we bring these um, separate physiological processes together by changing our breathing rate to come into alignment with these other ones that regulate our heart rate variability. This creates a resonance effect, and then that amplifies our HRV more than it would be otherwise. And continuing to practice that over time can help our body get better at just regulating our HRV in general.
Okay. So, stepping back a bit from research perspective, what makes breathwork such an accessible intervention compared to other stress management techniques?
Yeah, okay. So I think there's an important distinction to make, or at least an important acknowledgement to make about um, all of those, like the whole thing I just said, and to contextualize it both within, um, I might say, sort of like psychological approaches to stress management, and then maybe physiological approaches to like disease prevention. So the HRVB thing, the heart rate variability biofeedback exercise I was just talking about.
Mhm.
The original people who proposed that, the original scientists, pitched it as a technique to reduce the chances of like the negative effects of chronic hypertension over time, or to reduce the effects of a chronic diabetes over time and stuff, right? Those, I think you could argue that those are um, come to be because of the results of chronic stress on our body over time.
Mhm.
But um, in that sense, I think we're talking both about like psychological stress and physiological stress, right? In this question, I think we're really talking about like psychological stress, because another lens through which we think about breathing exercise is if I'm feeling overwhelmed or unfocused or um, like stressed in the moment, I can do these types of exercises to help myself calm down in the moment too, right?
Correct.
Um, so your question was about what's the connection between breath work and those sort of, or why is breathing
Yeah.
accessible? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So from that HRVB perspective, I think the reason breath was selected, or why it's such a easy one, is it's kind of the most readily available and easily modifiable kind of like bodily process that we have, that we can modify to bring into alignment with the other ones that will create that resonance effects, right? So theoretically, there are all kinds of things that regulate our heart rate variability, from like what we eat, whether our body's in like actively digesting things, whether or not we drink coffee throughout the day. Like there's short term cyclical things, and then there's longer term things, right? Um, Breathing is one that is just always readily available, right? Wherever we are, we have our breath with us. And it's kind of this really interesting physiological signal that lies right at the periphery of volitional control. So I
Mhm.
can exert complete control over my breath to a point, right? I can't just hold my breath forever. Eventually, my body will kick in and say, no, no, you're going to breathe. Um, but it's a signal that we have volitional control over, but it also has all of these influences on the autonomic processes going on in our body. So our heart rate, our everything else, right? Our brain activity. And I think that's why it has emerged as a really common and frequent and popular choice for these types of activities, because it's sort of unique in the sense that it lies right at the boundary of, it's a thing that can have these benefits, but
Mhm.
it's quite easy for us to exert control over it, right? Theoretically, you could say, okay, well, I'll just like think my heart rate to slow down, and that could have a similar effect. That's a lot harder to do than to think
Mhm.
about breathing in a certain way, right? So I think that's why.
Okay. So, one thing which I found very interesting in your research is you have compared expensive HRV biofeedback systems with simple breathwork practices. And now I also see that there are new vagus nerve activation devices also available in the market. So someone who is deciding to buy those kind of devices versus using simple breathwork modalities, what would be your pointer, suggestion, insight? What's the difference between these kind of devices
Mhm.
and simple breathwork?
Okay, cool. Yeah.
If
So,
you try to do a comparison or maybe no advantages.
yeah. So that's a really interesting question, right? Because the type of research I do is in an area of computer science called human computer interaction. And I really approach all of this from the perspective of like user needs and product design and system design and stuff, more so than uh, hard physiology,
Mhm.
psychology, empirical um, medical findings, right? So I've done my best to kind of like learn this area to the degree that I do, and then I think I have an okay kind of understanding of this area. But really, my specialty is in like user needs evaluation and thinking about how and why people might use these types of systems and technology design, really, right? So, um, yeah, we this is true, right? Part of the research I've done so far was comparing this instrumented biofeedback activity against a more simple, just on instrumented constant rate paced breathing exercise at 6 breaths per minute. Um, and really, I think if you were to go back to the original like literature that proposes this HRV biofeedback, I don't think the authors of that would really say it's hard and fast one or the other at all, right? I think there's really kind of, well, I can think of immediately sort of two real motivating reasons why this biofeedback activity might be used, right? One, so earlier we talked about that barrel reflex mechanism,
Mhm.
and I said that it operates essentially at 6 cycles per minute, right? There's this activity. That exact rate really matters according to a lot of dimensional things about your body, right? So it's based on kind of how long your circulatory system is, what your exact heart rate is, what volume of blood is in your body. All of these kind of like physical properties can influence the exact cycle of that over time. So, although we sort of know that 6 breaths per minute is roughly in alignment with that underlying barrel reflex to create that resonance effect that is really desirable and wanted, it varies individually from person to person according to all these different factors, right? So, what the original author, or what the people who proposed this HRV biofeedback activity, I think what they were really saying was this is a great way to dial in on the exact breathing rate, be it 5.5 or 6.5 or 5 or whatever it is, right? It's somewhere around 6, but we can find the exact one to amplify and maximize these effects. If you look at the training protocols they lay out medically, what they would really have their patients do is a combination of um, going in clinically and using the specialized equipment to identify that rate, and then going home and breathing at that rate, like doing the breathing exercise daily, but not instrumented, because we've identified it using the sophisticated tools. We can now just practice it without that, right? So I think they would really um, argue for a combination. It's built right into the protocols that they propose. Um, However, I'm not, so one key benefit of HRVP is you can really dial into the exact breathing rate that is going to create the most amplified resonance effect in your individual body, right? That's one benefit of using biofeedback. Another one, I think, more from my perspective as like a technology designer, is the idea that it allows us to, it like creates signals and data that we can use to provide people with real-time feedback about their performance in the exercise, right? Having the ability to see what's happening, to see that I'm doing this and it's creating some measurable effect in my body, and to see the changes in that signal change over time, goes a long way to motivating doing an activity like this,
Hmm.
right? We can use those signals to design systems that then allow us to see our progress, track our performance, even tools that allow us to like dynamically adjust and tweak and provide feedback and guidance to help people do the exercise more effectively over time. And to show them that it is a successful and beneficial and meaningful activity to do. So, although I think you certainly can get the benefits of this type of work from passive breathing alone, right, without any instrumented or sensing or whatever, I think that information does go a long way to designing and motivating and engaging and experiments that convey success to users. So I think there's certainly benefit in it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And kind of like anything technologically, accessibility to those sensors and the compute power to do the signal processing needed is just becoming more and more readily available, right? So from that perspective, I think it makes sense to be able to provide people with feedback.
Okay. So now here's what people really want to know. Does breathwork and improved HRV translate into long-term health benefits, like, say, better blood pressure or improved immunity? Should breathwork be part of daily practice? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think if you survey the literature, you could kind of divide things up into two camps or two categories, right? Studies that look at immediate effects of breath work. So, from our perspective earlier, if I'm stressed in the moment or overwhelmed or unfocused in the moment, are there measurable benefits? Are there measurable benefits of doing a slow breathing exercise? And then after 10 minutes, am I more focused or am I more centered or am I more? There's a body of literature that evidences that that is the case, right? We can see things even as kind of rudimentary or primitive as like improvements in response time. So I have a faster reaction time, which is, if you think about like the hierarchy of how we perform tasks, that's a very fundamental thing that would then ripple down into all other kinds of like more complex activities that we do, right? So there is evidence to support that in the moment, slow breathing can have those benefits. There also is, again, more on kind of the medicine psychophysiology side, a large body of literature that evidences that HRVB protocol, so the slow breathing, the combination of using biofeedback and just the passive simple breathing at a rate at home, does have a lot of benefits as well. So the kind of leaders in that area would be, again, Paul Lehrer, Richard Gervitz, another Dr. Richard Brown. But yeah, they've seen in longer term trials, right, things from reductions in like symptoms of diabetes, symptoms of hypertension, a lot of stuff around these kind of like stress related diseases. So yeah, I think there's evidence on both sides.
Okay. And if someone who is looking to get started, what's an effective breathwork practice they should go ahead with? What's your advice?
Yeah, there's many out there, right? Like the one I'm most familiar with is that simple 6 breaths per minute protocol, which is really, if you think about it, each breath takes 10 seconds. 6 of those adds up to 60 seconds, which is a minute. So it's kind of 5 in, 5 out, 5 in, 5 out, right? That is sort of the simplest breathing exercise that I think, although I'm much more familiar with studying it from like the HRV physiology side of things, I think there's evidence to support that that activity also has those like shorter term psychological benefits as well. There are also, I'm less familiar, like I haven't worked with these other ones in as much detail as I have with the 6 breaths per minute breathing, but things like extended exhalation. So you could still maybe do a 6 breaths per minute, but the inhale is faster and then the exhale is more prolonged. The idea there being that it allows your body to be in that state where the heart rate is lowered and you're kind of in a more the parasympathetic side of the balance for a longer period of time, right? For if the exhale is longer and exaggerated compared to the duration of the inhale, then the net amount of time you're spending in that like relaxed exhale state is boosted overall compared to if they were even. So that's another one. But there are all kinds of breathing exercises available. For example, box breathing, stack breathing, all of these different ones, right? From the perspective of the short-term psychological focus and whatever benefits, I think something that we definitely shouldn't overlook about just any breathing activity in general is it's an opportunity for us to take all of our focus onto a singular thing at a point in time. So whether it's 6 in and 6 out, or 8 in or 8 out, or 4 4 4 4 of the box, the effect that we are taking potentially our scattered mind that's thinking about all kinds of different things and focusing it all in on one singular point of focus at a time, I think also has a benefit and is also something that we shouldn't overlook at all. So I think getting started, to sum it up, the advice I would have is probably don't worry about what exact exercise it is as you're getting started. The notion of just getting into the habit of doing it regularly and the practice of bringing all your focus onto a singular thing, I think, has benefits in and of itself. So, yeah.
Great. I think this sums it up. So thanks, Aaron, for this interview. This has been incredibly insightful. Thanks for breaking down the science in such an accessible way and for doing the research that actually helps people make informed choices about their health. Really appreciate your time, Aaron, today, and looking forward to catch up soon.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. And I'm happy to chat further anytime. So it's great. I'm really happy that you're working on this problem from the kind of industry side, right? So, yeah, I think it's great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.